11 days of the same brown smoke rising from the same corner of Jalabad district, the same radio crackle at 0300, the same Lieutenant Harrow pressing his thumb into a map like the map owed him something. 11 days of us, crouched behind HESCO barriers, eating cold MREs, and pretending the sniper on the eastern roofline wasn't picking us apart. We'd lost 2 men to that roofline. Not in the movie's way. Not in the way where you get a slow death with last words and clean blood. Martinez went down between the generator and the supply tent, mid-sentence, pointing at something he'd noticed, gone before the sound even reached us. Kowalski the morning after. Same corner. Different inch of sky. Same shooter. We didn't know, yet it was a woman. I'm Specialist Devin Rourke, 3rd Infantry, 2nd Tour. First time I ever felt like the ground itself was trying to get me killed. Before Jalabad, I'd done Kandahar, done a nothing deployment to Djibouti that was mostly sunburn and paperwork. I knew how to keep my head. I knew the rhythm of bad places. This one didn't have a rhythm. The compound we were securing, an old agricultural building the brass had decided was strategically critical for reasons nobody 3 pay grades below general ever gets explained, sat in a bowl between 2 ridge lines. Beautiful country, actually, mountains that looked like they'd been stacked by someone who cared about the work. Dawn came in slow and gold over the eastern ridge, and if you could forget about the roofline for 30 seconds, you'd almost feel something good about being alive. I stopped forgetting about the roofline after Martinez. Lieutenant Harrow had requested air support twice. Denied. Too close to a civilian structure on the northern side, some school or former school, or building someone drew a school on a map. He'd requested a 2nd team. Denied. He'd requested at minimum a counter-sniper unit. Denied, then rerouted, then the reroute came back as a single asset. 1 person. The radio operator read the asset confirmation twice because he thought he'd misheard. Staff Sergeant Nadia Voss, 75th Ranger Regiment Support Attachment, qualified marksman, secondary role as a combat controller. No team. No spate. Just her, and a transit case that had been strapped to the back of a Humvee for what looked like 6 hard hours of mountain road based on the dust coating every surface of it. Harrow went out to meet the vehicle. I was on my 3rd cup of something that stopped being coffee around the 2nd cup, and I watched from the barrier. The Humvee door opened. She dropped out of it the way people drop out of vehicles when every joint has been complaining for an hour. That particular grimace, the quick roll of the left shoulder, the inventory check the body does before it decides to cooperate. Compact. Dark hair pulled back, so tight it looked structural. She had the kind of face that held information without releasing any of it. She looked at the compound. She looked at the eastern ridgeline. She looked at Harrow. How long's it been active? She said. 11 days, Harrow said. She looked at the ridgeline again. She said. Like that. Like 11 days of a siege was a moderately interesting piece of data. She pulled the transit case off the rack herself before the driver could offer, and walked past Harrow toward the barrier without another word. He turned and watched her go. I watched him watching her. The radio operator, a 19-year-old from Alabama, named Briggs, who had not yet learned the art of keeping expressions off his face, said quietly, almost to himself, "Who is that?" That first night, she didn't sleep. I know because I had the 0 to 100 watch, and she was already awake when I got to the east-facing post, already lying flat on the top of a barrier stack with a spotting scope, studying the ridgeline the way a chess player studies a board in a game they've already decided they're going to win. I didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. We had a solid 20 minutes of mutually agreeable silence. Then, without moving the scope, "You were here when they lost Martinez." Not a question. "Yeah," I said. "Same position both times?" "The 2 Kia. Within about 15 meters. She made a small sound. Filed it. "Shooter's got a comfort zone," she said. "People do that. Doesn't matter how good you are. You find the angle that works, and you love it a little too much." I looked at the ridgeline. Nothing. Dark geometry against a darker sky. "How do you find where the angle is?" I said. She pulled back from the scope, looked at me sideways. There was something almost amused in it, or not amused exactly. More like a door opened a centimeter and then closed again. "You find where you would be," she said, "and then you account for the difference." She went back to the scope. I finished my watch. She was still there when Briggs came to relieve me. Still there when I woke up at 0600 and looked over. The transit case was open beside her. Inside it, nested in foam cut to exact specification, was a rifle I didn't have the vocabulary for. I knew enough to know it wasn't standard issue. I knew enough to know it cost more than my car. I knew enough to feel, for the first time in 11 days, something that wasn't quite fear. Harrow briefed us at 0800. The situation, as he laid it out, had gotten layered. Intel suggested the sniper on the roofline wasn't operating independently. There was a ground unit, 8 to 12 personnel, using the siege condition as cover for a supply movement through the valley below the compound. The sniper was the lock on the door. While we kept our heads down and couldn't move, the ground unit moved freely. The sniper wasn't just a threat. The sniper was the strategy. Harrow looked at Voss when he said that part. She was leaning against the far wall with her arms crossed, and she nodded once like he'd confirmed something she'd already worked out at 0300 with her scope and her silence. Timeline, she said. Supply movement completes tonight, best estimate. They'll have no further use for the position after that. So they pull the shooter tonight or tomorrow morning. That's the assessment. She looked at the floor for a moment. Then back up. I'll need the afternoon, she said. I need to move once to the north barrier, and I need everyone to behave completely normally while I do it. No reaction. No eyes on me. I need the shooter looking at the same pattern they've been looking at for 11 days. Harrow nodded. And I need someone to give me a reason for the shooter to expose their position. She looked around the room. Landed on me. I don't know why. Maybe I was just standing in the wrong geometry. You're the one with the watch schedule at the east barrier. Rourke, I said. Helpful. Very helpful. Rourke. She said it like she was putting it somewhere she could find it later. Tomorrow morning, 0530, you're going to step outside the east barrier with a radio, and you're going to stand there for exactly 4 seconds. The room got quiet. For seconds, I said. 3 is too fast for shot confirmation. 5 is too long. For seconds, you step back inside. The shooter will acquire you. They'll assess. She paused. They'll lean into the angle. For seconds in front of sniper. I looked at Harrow. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had already done the math and was waiting for me to do it too. And then? I said. And then, Voss said, you go back inside. You have coffee. You don't think about what happens next, because what happens next is not your job. She picked up the transit case. It's mine, she said. Lay on my cot, staring at the canvas overhead while the compound made its nighttime noises. Generator hum, distant dogs, Briggs snoring through 3 wars from across the tent. I ran the 4 seconds in my head the way you run a bad conversation. You can't stop replaying. Step out. Radio up. Stand there. Step back. For seconds. I'd done harder things. At least that's what I kept telling myself until I stopped believing it around 0200 and just lay there being honest with the ceiling. The thing about being in someone's crosshairs is that it's not really about the bullet. I've been shot at before. Incoming fire has a specific quality to it. Immediate, directional. Something to react to. This was different. This was the idea of it. The precision of it. The fact that some person on a roofline would see me and make a decision, and either I'd walk back inside or I wouldn't, and the entire gap between those two outcomes would be a distance Voss measured in millimeters while I stood very still and try not to look like a man who knew what was about to happen. I got up at 0400 and made real coffee with the good grounds Harrow kept in his kit that everyone pretended not to know about. Voss was already at the north barrier. I could barely see her. That was the point. She'd been there for hours, I figured, working herself into position while the compound slept and the pre-dawn dark gave her cover. She'd built herself into the barrier the way water finds shape in a container. Nothing forced, nothing obvious, just present in a way that required a second look to confirm. She was maybe 30 meters from me, and I could only see her because I knew to look. The shooter on the roofline had no reason to look. I drank my coffee at the south side of the compound, where the shot angle was blocked by the building itself. I thought about Martinez. I thought about how he'd been mid-sentence. I've thought about that a lot, the mid-sentence part. The terrible ordinariness of it. the way it made every sentence since feel unfinished. I moved to the East Barrier access point. Briggs was on the radio 6 feet away, and he looked at me with those 19-year-old eyes that don't know yet how to hide anything. He'd been briefed. He knew what I was about to do. He looked at me the way you look at someone who's about to do something brave and slightly stupid, and you don't have a single useful thing to say about either quality. "You good?" he said. "Ask me in 5 minutes," I said. I picked up the secondary radio, not because I needed it, because it gave my hand something to do, gave the tableau a reason to exist, gave the shooter something to read as routine. Soldier at the barrier with a radio was the texture of every morning. Nothing to flag, nothing to adjust for. I thought, Voss is already looking at where you are. I thought, she has been looking at where the shooter is for 16 hours. I stepped outside. 4 seconds is longer than you think. Long enough for the cold morning air to find the gap between my collar and my neck. Long enough to see the eastern ridgeline in full. Mountains going blue-gray in the early light, the kind of beautiful that has absolutely no manners about its timing. Long enough to pick out the specific roofline. The particular shadow. The place where a person who was very good at not existing was not existing right now. I held the radio up. A reason to stand still. 1. The wind came through the valley and brought dust and the smell of cooked fire from somewhere distant. My boots were solid in the ground. That mattered more than it should have. Feeling the ground. 2. Somewhere behind me and above me and 30 meters to my left, Voss was doing something I couldn't see and couldn't hear and wouldn't understand even if I could. She was solving an equation with a barrel and a breath and 11 days of a ridgeline memorized down to its shadows. 3. Nothing on the roofline moved. Nothing I could see. But something shifted in the quality of the stillness. A held thing, a decision being weighed, a crosshair finding its comfort zone the way she said it would. 4. I stepped back inside. The sound came 8 seconds later. 1 shot. Not the crack of incoming, the compression of outgoing, that specific concussive push of a large caliber round, leaving a barrel at velocity. The sound reached us and then stopped being a sound and became an absence. The compound held its breath. Then nothing. No second shot. No return fire. No sound at all for the eastern ridgeline. Briggs said, very quietly, "Did you don't?" I said. I don't know why. It just felt like the wrong moment for a sentence to finish. We waited. 3 minutes. 5. 10. The roofline stayed empty in the way that only empty things stay empty after they've been forced into it. You can feel the difference between a place no one is and a place where someone was. At 0548, Voss came in through the North Barrier access. She broke down the rifle with the methodical speed of someone who has done this specific task in the dark, in the rain, and worse. Nested each piece back into its foam cutout. Latched the case. Harrow came across the compound at something faster than his usual pace. "Confirmed," he said. "Give your spotters 10 minutes to verify," she said. "But yes." He looked at her. I looked at her. Briggs looked at her with his whole undisciplined face. She picked up the transit case. "I need water," she said. "And if whoever made that coffee is willing to share, I'll consider it a professional courtesy." The spotter team confirmed at 0604. The eastern roofline position had been vacated. The shooter had rolled left coming up to acquire, exposed a 9-inch window of silhouette above the parapet lip at a distance of 840 meters at a wind variable of approximately 12 knots cross. 1 shot. Nobody said much. There isn't a lot of language for that kind of precision. It sits outside what words usually do. I gave her the coffee. She drank it standing up, looking at nothing in particular, somewhere inside her own head, doing whatever accounting that kind of morning requires. I wanted to ask her something. I could feel the question building. Some version of how or why or what does it cost? The thing you ask when you've watched someone do something that reorders your sense of what's possible. I didn't ask. She told me herself. What happens next is not your job. Some things aren't questions. They're just facts you carry. Without the sniper holding us in place, we moved fast. 2 teams, direct interdiction on their supply route. No casualties on our side. Clean. The kind of operation that looks inevitable in the after-action report and looked very much not inevitable for the 11 days preceding it. The compound, which had been a siege, was a secured position. The supply movement, which had been ongoing for 11 days under our pinned-down helplessness, was over. We'd later find out they'd moved maybe 40% of what they intended. The other 60% sat in a valley depot we located from the intel that came unstuck once the lock was gone. But that's the part that goes in the report. The part that doesn't go in the report is what happened at 1400 when the Brigadier General's vehicle arrived for a forward assessment. I was resetting comms at the South Barrier. Heard the vehicle. Didn't think much about it. Brass comes forward after a successful resolution the way they don't come forward while the situation is unresolved, which is a pattern I've noticed and keep to myself. Harrow went out to receive. Standard. Voss was sitting on an equipment case near the north wall, eating an MRE with the focused disinterest of someone getting through a task rather than experiencing a meal. She had the transit case beside her right boot, touching it the way people unconsciously maintain contact with things that matter. The general came through the barrier access. He was two-star, the kind of compact authority that comes from decades of other people stepping aside when you move. Gray at the temples, shoulders that made decisions. He took in the compound with one efficient sweep, and his eyes landed on Voss the way eyes land on the thing that doesn't fit the expectation. She stood up, not snapping to, just stood up, the way you stand when someone enters a room and you're acknowledging physics. Staff Sergeant Voss, he said, more a statement than a greeting. Sir, she said. He walked toward her with the particular pace of someone who has something they want to deliver in person. I've seen your file, he said. Read the engagement reports from Cost. From Loger. A pause. I'll be honest with you. I had reservations about this assignment. She waited. 840 meters, he said. 12-knot cross. Single round. Yes, sir. He looked at her for a moment in a way that seemed to be revising something. Then, I want you attached to the regional task force. Permanently. There's a team forming out of Bagram that I appreciate that, sir, she said. Her voice didn't change. Didn't warm or sharp. I'm going to decline. The compound went quiet in a specific way. Harrow's face did something complicated. Briggs, who was 20 feet away pretending to check a radio he'd already checked twice, looked at the ground. The general tilted his head. You're declining, he said. I have a commitment to my current unit through rotation end, she said. And I prefer to work attached, not permanently assigned. Different problems need different eyes. He was silent for a beat. 2. The kind of silence that in most military conversations contains a consequence. You're an unusual soldier, Voss, he said finally. And she said it then. Not loudly. Not with performance or edge or any quality designed to land. To set it the way someone states a fact they've made peace with. Go ask your general about me, sir, she said. Whichever general you've talked to who's seen the work. I think you'll find the file explains it better than I can. I watched him. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face. Not offense, not admiration exactly. Something more like recognition. Like he'd heard a frequency he wasn't expecting and was recalibrating. Then he nodded. Once. I'll be in touch through your chain, he said. I understand, sir. He moved off toward Harrow, and they walked the perimeter, and Voss sat back down on the equipment case and picked up her MRE and kept eating with the same focused disinterest. Briggs drifted over to me after a few minutes. His face was doing all the things his face always did. Did she just, he started. Yeah, I said. To a 2-star. Yeah. He looked at her across the compound. She was reading something off a small notepad now, completely elsewhere. The general already filed somewhere irrelevant in whatever architecture she used to organize the world. Holy Lord, Briggs said. I didn't say anything. I understood something then that I probably should have understood earlier, or maybe couldn't have understood earlier, because some things need the full context before they're legible. Voss wasn't performing calm. She wasn't disciplined into stillness, the way they train you to be. She was just actually somewhere the rest of us hadn't gotten to yet. Someplace past the noise of rank and assessment and the constant low frequency of other people's opinions. 840 meters, 12-knot cross, one shot, and then coffee and an MRE and a notepad and a general's offer that she declined the way most people decline a second helping they didn't want. She left the following morning. The Humvee came at 0630, and she loaded the transit case herself before the driver could offer, and she did the inventory check. Roll of the left shoulder, that slight grimace, and she was climbing in when I came out. I almost didn't say anything. Almost let it be one of those moments that just passes. Voss, I said. She paused. Martinez, I said. Kowalski, the two we lost. I stopped. There wasn't a clean end to the sentence. Yeah. She looked at me. I know, she said. Not sympathetically. Not formally. Just acknowledged. Filed. Carried. She got in the Humvee. I watched it go up the mountain road until it was a shape, and then a dust plume, and then a direction. Briggs came up beside me. You know anything about her? He said. Before this? Where she came from? I thought about the scope at 0300. The roofline memorized in darkness. The 4-second geometry she'd built around a man who needed to stand still for one specific purpose. Enough, I said. Northern Virginia. A job that involved spreadsheets and meetings about spreadsheets. A small apartment with a good window. On certain mornings, usually November mornings when the light comes in low and gray, I make coffee and stand at the window and look at something that isn't the eastern ridgeline of anything, and the body doesn't know the difference right away. Has to catch up. That's not complaint. That's just the architecture of having been somewhere that made strong impressions. People ask me about the tours. At dinners, at the particular kind of social occasion where someone finds out you served and decides this means they should ask you about it. They want the stories. The close calls, the camaraderie, the brotherhood of men in hard places doing hard things. I have those stories. I tell them sometimes. But the one I keep coming back to is Jalabad. Not because it was the worst. It wasn't. Not because I was the bravest. I wasn't. I stood outside a barrier for 4 seconds with a radio I didn't need, and then I stepped back inside and had coffee. That is the entire scope of my heroism on that particular morning. I keep coming back to it because of what it taught me about the thing nobody talks about when they talk about war. We talk about courage like it's a volume knob, like some people have it turned higher, and that's what separates them from everyone else. We use it to mean not afraid when it has never once in the history of the word meant not afraid. It means afraid and going anyway. It means knowing exactly what the cost might be and making the calculation with clear eyes. Voss was not afraid. I don't know that for certain. She would never have said so, and I would never have asked. But I know what 16 hours alone with a scope in the dark before a shot like that costs. I know what it means to build a plan around a variable you can't control. Me, standing still for 4 seconds, trusting that she was where she needed to be, that she'd done the math correctly, and to hold that plan steady through the night. Fear doesn't disqualify you from the plan. Fear is the plan running correctly. I looked her up once. 2 years after, on a slow Tuesday, the way you look people up when a memory surfaces and you're not sure what you're looking for. She'd been promoted. There was a brief mention in an Army Times piece about female soldiers in specialized roles. No detail, the kind of article that gestures at a story it can't fully tell. Her name appeared in one paragraph, attached to an action in a province I recognized, with the kind of phrasing used when the full description is classified, and the partial description is a thing that makes you set down whatever you're eating. She declined comment for the piece. I laughed at that, out loud, alone, in my apartment. Of course she did. The thing about those 4 seconds, the thing I didn't understand until well after I was out of the Army, until I'd had enough quiet time to actually examine it, is that they weren't about courage. They were about trust. Voss had spent 16 hours building a system. She'd moved in darkness. She'd read a ridgeline in half-light. She'd made calculations about wind and distance and the particular way a human being leans into a comfortable angle before they take a shot. She'd built the whole structure, and then she needed one piece she couldn't provide herself. For seconds of a person standing still. I was that piece. I didn't do anything brave. I followed instructions. I held a radio and stood in a place and then stepped back inside. The machine needed one component it didn't have, and I happened to be that component, and I put myself in the slot. What I felt in those 4 seconds was very real and very uncomplicated. It was fear, specific, body-based, entirely rational fear. The kind that knows exactly what it's afraid of and doesn't dress it up. And also underneath that, something else. The thing I keep trying to find a right word for and haven't yet. The best I've gotten is certainty that the person behind me had done the work. Not faith, not hope, something more grounded. Evidence-based trust in someone who had shown you, over hours of darkness and silence and a scope pointed at a problem she was going to solve, that they were precisely who the job required. I stepped outside because Voss had already done the hard part. The 4 seconds were easy by comparison. 2 months ago, I was at a dinner. Someone found out I'd served. The usual sequence, the lean in, the question. I told a Kandahar story, the one about the broken vehicle, and the goat herd who turned out to speak better English than any of us, which gets a laugh, and doesn't ask anything difficult of anyone. But afterward, driving home, I thought about Jalabad again, about Martinez mid-sentence, about Kowalski, about Briggs's young, undisciplined face, and Harrow's thumb in the map, and the way the compound smelled at 0300 when everything was cold and nobody was winning anything. About a woman lying flat on a barrier in the dark for 16 hours, alone, solving a problem that had killed 2 people and was going to kill more if it didn't get solved. About one shot. About what she said to a 2-star general with the same voice she used to ask for coffee. Go ask your general about me. Not defiance. Not ego. Just the record speaks. I don't need to. I don't know what I believe about war. I've been thinking about it for years, and I'm nowhere near the clean conclusion that would let me put it away. I know what it cost people I cared about. I know what it cost me in ways that are invisible on the good days and less invisible on the November mornings. But I know this. There are people who go to the hardest places the world has, and they do not go because they're not afraid. They go because they found a way to be afraid and useful simultaneously. Because the fear and the precision and the 16 hours in the dark are not in conflict. They're the same process running at the same time in the same person. I was the variable in Voss's equation. She was the constant. Some people are built that way. Most aren't, and that's fine, and the world needs both kinds. But those that are the ones who lie still in the dark and do the math and ask only for 4 seconds of a scared man standing still. Those people don't need the general's recognition or the Army Times paragraph or anyone's understanding of what they actually did. They need a transit case with foam cut to exact specification. They need coffee after. They need the next roof line. Martinez was mid-sentence. I still don't know what he was pointing at. I hope it was something good. Something that deserved pointing at. The kind of thing you notice when you're alive and paying attention and the morning light is coming over a mountain range that has no manners about being beautiful. I hope it was that.